All right, on today's episode of Bottles and Bites Without Borders, we're thrilled to welcome a guest who's redefining the way we learn about wine. Vince from Vino is our guest today. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by wine lists or mystified by tasting notes, Vince is the guy who makes it all make sense. Through his hit YouTube show, he takes viewers on an immersive journey to some of the world's most exciting wine regions, meeting the winemakers, exploring the culture, and breaking it all down in a way that's fun, approachable, and seriously informative. In this episode, we're going to dive into his recent journey to the Loire Valley and to Burgundy. We'll also find out his journey from sommelier to storyteller, maybe some of his favorite wine adventures, and his take on what truly makes a great bottle of wine. So pour yourself a glass, get comfortable, and let's talk wine with Vince from Vino.
Welcome to Bottles and Bites Without Borders, where every sip and every bite tell a story. Rob is your host. Each week, he will take you on a delicious journey, from vineyard tales and distillery secrets to culinary traditions. So, grab a favorite drink, a plate of something tasty, and join us for another adventure with Bottles and Bites.
Vince, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, happy to be here on a gloomy Chicago afternoon.
Is it gloomy? It's about 83 down here in Houston.
That would be lovely. No, I am cold and gloomy. I haven't seen the sun in 4 days. So
I've had some visits to Chicago. January, February, when you hear the name Windy City, this is the time of year where that really kind of comes to fruition.
I mean, it's just brutal. It's really not the cold. It's just the lack of seeing any sort of sunlight. So you don't want to go out. You can't go out, do things, go on walks. It's a huge bummer. It's the hardest part about being what I think is in one of the best cities of the world. I'm in a suburb, but I mean, I think Chicago is one of the best cities you could find in America. But this period of time can be very challenging.
So you don't want to hear that I might play golf in the next couple of days.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
Well, we appreciate you coming on the show. I'm looking forward to having this conversation. I was mentioning to you kind of before we started, I've been watching your show, Vino, for a while, a couple of years, more than a couple of years. And, I've had a lot of listeners to the podcast also watch your show, but have asked if I'm ever going to have you on. So I want to say first, thank you very much for taking some time to come on. And
I get that a lot from a lot of our fans. Hey, thank you so much. I feel almost like undeserving because people will come up and say thank you, like we've helped them the way a doctor would or something like that. They're very grateful for what we provide, and I am so humbled to hear that every time, because I started the show as a way to get people and consumers and people who are in the trade to have an easier time learning wine. When I took my certified sommelier exam, I just found that there was no video-based resources that I really felt like would help guide you through that. I remember when I first got my waiter job in Chicago, my first one, I would want to do more. I'd want to understand more and be able to talk about the wine list. And when I went to seek the knowledge, there was book study and flashcards, and there was no clear path. And then there was the courses of WSET or Court of Masters, but they're very expensive when you're first starting out. And as a young person in the food industry, I didn't have $1,200 to throw at, the guided courses. And so I was lucky enough that at my next job, my hotel paid for them for me, but otherwise I couldn't have done it. So I wanted to make a product that was the product I was looking for when I was seeking this knowledge. And now that we've been able to do that, and we have people who will kind of message us and say, hey, I just got this new job at a restaurant or as a distributor, or I'm just getting into wine and you've really helped me understand it better. Like, that's the ultimate compliment for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's back up a little bit. And I want to ask you, because everybody has, some might go, it's kind of a boring question. How'd you get into wine? But the journey for everybody's kind of different. And what I'm hearing from you, tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds like wine was something you felt like you had to learn because you kind of got into this fine dining restaurant kind of world, and then wine was a part of that?
Partially. I had grown up around wine because my father ran an import company. He imported goods from Italy. It wasn't just wine. There was candy and cigars and stuff. This was when I was very young, so not like I was drinking wine with him or anything, but I was just around it. I was familiar with it. He would drink wine. And then as I got into college, I paid my way through that with restaurant jobs, and that's where that experience happened. I told you where I wanted jobs that they wouldn't give me because I didn't have enough wine experience. And so then I went to LA, and same thing. I wanted to be a rock star. I was a singer-songwriter, and that was the goal, was to do that full time. But again, just like college, I was paying my way through that with restaurant jobs like most people in LA do. The difference is that most people in LA don't want or like the restaurant job when they're trying to be an actor. But I actually really found a passion there. I was really good at it. I don't brag too much, but I would say I was just really good at customer service. I really enjoyed that aspect of it because I was a lot of times behind the bar, which is a very like interactive position. And I got to educate people about cocktails and wine. And I had some mentors who really took me under their wing when I was in the restaurant space. That's when I took the exams, and that's how I found a passion for it. And then after I took the exams, I said, man, there's just this gap in the market of a product that would help people learn without taking these exams. And that's how I came up with the idea for V is for Vino.
Man, and we're glad you did. Let me ask you this. When people go to V is for Vino on YouTube, kind of give them a sense of what they could expect from an episode. Because, when I think a lot of people who consume, because let me start by saying it this way. Your channel is really a show. It's not really a channel. I think people who consume YouTube think about a 10 or 15 minute video that they can watch from whoever that content creator is. You're doing a show. These are, I think, 45 minutes to an hour most of the time I see. So kind of tell folks what they can expect and what they're going to get from a show on V is for Vino.
Yeah, it's funny. YouTube was never the primary platform when I started, and that's why it kind of feels like a show. I wanted to make a show. My goal was, okay, let's just get 3 episodes under our belt, and then I'll go pitch the show to a network and I'll sell it, and that'll be how it happens. What happened was I learned that wine shows in general are just a tough sell for a major network because it is niche. Even though there's a lot of people who like wines, it's still niche. And back when I started in 2018, the show came out, like the streaming wars had just kind of kicked off. And so what that allowed, which was kind of cool, was more niche shows and topics to get airtime. But the ultimate way to do that was on YouTube, because on YouTube, there's no gatekeepers. So like I was trying to go to, okay, maybe a Netflix, maybe a Hulu, maybe if a travel channel or a food network, it's too niche for them, maybe a Netflix or Hulu or Amazon will take it. But when that didn't happen, I moved the show to YouTube kind of out of necessity. And it ended up working so much better because what we found is that we have this global audience. I mean, the whole world's on YouTube. And so people can find us all over the world via SEO. They search the topic. And so we're continually found. Whereas if we were on a network, on a streaming network, we're kind of at the mercy of, one, the network who's paying for the show, and two, if people are actually searching it and clicking it, or if the network is promoting it. But on YouTube, we're just found. This is a long way of saying the reason it feels like a show is because it was intended to be a show. And then we just happened to put it on YouTube. Now, the show itself, they're 45 to 60-minute deep dives of a wine region. We do regional based because if you're into wine, you learn that place is more important than anything else. And so some people have asked, why don't you just do like 5 shows in Napa and do a different winery every show? I'm like, because that's not what wine to me is. Wine to me is the culmination of culture and people and history and, yes, the wine product, but also food and tradition. And so I wanted to tell those stories in different places every time. So every episode is a new wine region. For instance, we just did both Loire and Burgundy, France. Those are 2 episodes, but we've done Lebanon, we've done Chile, we've done Sonoma, we've done Walla Walla, Washington. So we take one region and we really dissect it. I teach you about the grapes that are commonly made there. I use graphics and infographics. If anybody who's into wine has seen any of the Wine Folly books or blogs, I kind of took a lot of inspiration from that and said, okay, we can dissect what are the flavors and pop up graphics of what the flavors are. What's the tannin structure? What's the acid? And do it in little charts, plus interactive maps, because again, talking about place, right? You need a map to kind of visualize where all these places are and where the wines are coming from. And then in addition to all the educational content, we go to local restaurants, we meet with winemakers, we taste the wines, we do local cultural segments. It's turned into something that is more than a wine show, and that was always the goal, but I really feel like we've come into our own in the last 8 to 10 episodes in that regard.
So what season are you currently on? Is that season 6 is what I remember seeing?
Yeah, we just released the first 2 episodes of season 6, the 2 French episodes, and we're getting ready to film more of season 6 right now. We don't release everything all at once. I did back in the day, but now we just release the episodes as they come, and then once I have 5 episodes, I call that a season, and we move on to the next one.
And you still do some other content on YouTube, whether it be shorts or other things I've seen you do. Maybe you do some blind tastings, which I really like. I think those are fun to see you go through the blind tastings, but other things that people can consume and get from you. And to me, learning how to blind, I think, is very important. Not so that you can so much pick out the wine and nailed it, but more of understanding your palate, understanding what you like, what you don't like, but also understanding characteristics of certain grapes, what you should get from, a Pinot Noir versus a Syrah or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it on the head. I mean, I say that at the start of these blind tasting videos I did. I have 9 of them on our YouTube channel. They're 10 minutes each. They're not travel episodes, they're studio episodes. But the goal is to help people learn how to blind taste because, again, yes, you want to get the answer right. That's great. But it's kind of like the math problem when you were in, middle school and they're like, you have to show your work. And you were like, why? And the answer is because there's more value out of learning the process than there is in getting the correct answer.
Yeah.
And so that's what that series is. There's 9 episodes of that. We also have some random videos up there too, just how to taste, how to pair wine, things like that. Those are kind of gateway videos to the episodes. The episodes are definitely the main product, quote unquote. But we make these other videos because they help people find us. And they are a good resource. Like you said, the blind tasting videos in particular, if anybody's going through their Court of Masters or WSET exams, you have to blind taste. And this kind of lays a format of how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to jump into, let me just start before we jump into the 2 regions, because I want to talk about the 2 regions you visited and the 2 episodes that are most recently released. One thing I do love about your show, I'm a foodie guy, and I love that you always tie in food to your wine regions. And it's absolutely a part of that. It belongs there. I think a lot of people, when they're getting into wine, they want to just taste wines and figure out what they like. But tasting wine with food, to me, is so important to understand. And a lot of times what they say is what grows together goes together. So tasting wines and foods from a region that are meant to kind of be together, I think is very important and really helps you experience what you're supposed to from food and wine together.
Yeah, I mean, there's the rare occasion we'll all have a starter wine or something, a wine after dinner. But to me, it is exactly that. They are meant to be together. If you look at how they were typically consumed in, throughout history and definitely more in Europe, it's consumed with the food, usually the local dishes of the area. And so I also see food, I take the Bourdain approach of like, food is the gateway to the culture. Like if you want to understand the culture, you have to eat the food. Like I feel, if anybody has like dietary restrictions or things like that, when you go to another country, and if you say, I'm not going to eat that, I think more so that even American culture, it's important, but especially when you go to some of these cultures in Asia and in Europe, food is the way you can understand what's important. And not only that, but you can get together around a table and you can talk to people. So I really try and have an open mind with everything. I don't love every dish I have, though I'm not very picky if I'm honest. But I don't, just because I don't like the dish, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to eat. I'm still going to try it because that's part of the experience, and it goes right hand in hand with the wine. If I went in, I have wine preferences, right? Like anybody else does. But if I went in only drinking the wines that I typically enjoy, that would be cutting out so much of the wine world that needs their story told. And I also am trying to be conscious that it's not all for me. There's an audience too. Just because I might not like a certain style of wine, my audience might love it. So we try and cover as much of it with as much of an open mind as possible.
Have you ever had a wine on camera and didn't like it when a winemaker poured it for you? I'm sure you have, but how did you respond to that? How did you react?
Well, I start with the premise when I go into any segment that any wine is a miracle, right? Like the amount of process and the amount of effort and the amount of love that goes into any bottle of wine, especially the producers we feature on the show, which are not mass-produced factory producers, but are winemakers, right? Who kind of poured their heart and soul into it. So I start from there. There's like some people who have argued, in comments and things like that, like I only say nice things about the wine. I'm like, would you look at somebody to their face in front of them? You're sitting in front of them and tell them that you don't, like their life's work. Like I'm not going to do that. Number one. Number two, we vet the producers. I mean, I might not have tried every single wine in their portfolio. Oftentimes I know the producers well, or I've tried a few of their wines. Sometimes it is new producers, especially if I'm going to a country where maybe the wines are less common or less distributed, right? So there are surprises for sure. You'll notice when I have a big reaction to a wine versus not. There's usually no producers that I think, like I said, make bad wine. And I also think there's less bad wine in the market than there ever has been in human history. With the technology we have now and with the growing practices we have now, bad wine is not very common, like poorly made, flawed wine. There's really just wine that, hey, this is in my preferences, this is not, or maybe this is a wine that's ready to drink younger versus this wine is, I would say, probably needs more time in the bottle. So I kind of take the pizza approach. Like there's no bad pizza. There's just pizza, and some's better than others,
I like the way you think. Absolutely. And I learned from a master of wine, and it's always stuck with me, is that when you drink a new wine, the first thing you shouldn't do, it's part of the process, but it's not the first thing you should do, is whether you like it or not. The first thing you should do is evaluate the wine. Do you think it's a quality wine? Do you think it has balance, structure? Is everything working together the way it should? And then you can go, yeah, it's a well-made wine. It's just not for me, and that's fair enough. And I think you make a great point. In today's world, it's hard to find bad wine anymore. I think young drinkers, when I have friends come over, they go, ooh, that's not good. I don't like that. It's not good. I go, it's not that it's not good. It's just not for your palate, or your palate may not be ready for it yet. And so getting younger wine drinkers to figure out how to kind of evaluate wine to their palate and, kind of go through that process, I think is something that is important for them in their journey of drinking wine.
Yeah. You hit it on the head. When people we all have an evolution that we go through when we're into wine. Everybody, I can speak for the American evolution of wine, because the European one, I think, is different. They have different foods. They don't have as much sugar in their diet. They start drinking wine younger. So I'm sure, go through a different evolution. But most American palates will start, we're used to drinking juice and soda as a kid. And so you're used to sugar, and we have more sugar in our foods anyway, right? Yep. And so having a bone dry, earthy, not fruity red wine from an old world country or an ancient world country, like, it usually doesn't do it for people. Usually at the start, they might even start with wines that actually have residual sugar, off dry wines or sweet wines. But if they have dry wines, they're looking for fruity wines, right? They're looking for big, rich, kind of Northern California. There's also this bigger is better mentality in American palates. So like a lot of times the higher alcohol content is like, yeah, let's have that. So everybody starts there, including myself. I mean, that's, and you find that in most stores here, right? That's, if you go to a store that isn't a specialty wine shop, the largest section is going to be your California section. So that's what you're going to find. And then you sort of, hey, all right, What if I, people start to go with like leaner styles, usually higher acid, because one of the things I think when you're young is everybody thinks smooth is good. And smooth is a way, I try not to use that descriptor ever on a wine, but it does exist. It usually means low acid and integrated tannins, right? So it's got this kind of velvety texture. And that's a good thing when you want that, but that's not the only thing that makes good wine. Like, people associate it with quality. Whereas once you start diving more into wine, you might start getting into Pinot Noir, even if it's still a New World Pinot Noir, Oregon or California or somewhere else. That's not going to be smooth as often. There's going to be acid. It's going to be bright. It's going to be crisp. It's going to have that kind of, I don't like to use sour when describing acid, but it's going to have that tartness a bit. But then we talked about food. You pair it with food. It works perfectly. So you start to get into that. And then you start being like, all right, I want to try something that has different flavors because I'm sick of fruit flavors. And then you start getting into France and Italy, and you're like, oh my gosh, this doesn't smell like fruit at all. This smells like, dirt and, a raspberry crushed under a rubber car tire. And that starts to be fun. And then you continue to go and you're like, well, what else is out there? And then you go into the ancient world, or you go into, you might dabble in natural wines, or you might dabble in biodynamic wines, and or super obscure grapes. And so everybody has this evolution, and you can be at any point on that spectrum in your wine tasting career and go back and forth around it. That's why wine is awesome.
Yep. You nailed it. And you nailed my journey to a T. And I think that's most people's journey. Yeah, absolutely. I also want to say, in my journey as a dude, right, as a guy, my wife got into wine before I got into wine. She's the one that tugged me along. And then when I got in, down the rabbit hole I went. I was that guy, if you're going to go to a bar and order a glass while you're waiting for a table or something, my wife would get a white wine, and I was like, I'm a dude. I'm getting a red wine. I'm not sitting here with a white wine in my glass. Fast forward 10 years, and I got to tell you, white wine's where it's at. I'm seeing more and more people enjoy it. I don't know if it's because, from a cost standpoint, it's a little bit less than a red wine. It can still be very complex and refreshing. But, man, I absolutely love white wines now. Are you seeing more and more of this from men specifically and in the consumer base?
Well, the consumer base in general is starting to lean towards low alcohol, and white wines tend to fit that bill, number one. So we're seeing that trend. Also, when you get further along in that journey and you start getting into wine, you learn that white wines are usually easier to pair with most foods. If you're doing a tasting menu at a nice place that has 7 courses, 8 courses, if it's up to the Somm, they're probably pairing 5 of those with white wines or rosé or orange wine or something that like that, because as the wines get heavier and richer, they just pair with less, So, and listen, you can pair whatever you want. I'm a big proponent of, I like good pairings. To me, that's like part of the fun of wine, is finding the good pairing. That being said, if you want to drink what you like, that's totally fine as well. If you just like, hey, this is what I like, and I don't care if it matches or not, that's totally fine. But you start to learn that white wines do pair a little better. And I find that like you said, from a cost standpoint, it really does work well. A lot of the big ticket, highly sought after wines are reds, whereas there's usually more gems to be found in white wine. White wine, I don't like to use the term easier to make, because there's a lot of love in good white wine that needs to be put into it. But it usually takes less time. There's usually less skin, you don't have the skin contact, so that's less time during the fermentation. If there's oak, it's usually less than what you would do for red wine. So it's cheaper for the producer to make. And so you do find more value there too. To answer your question, yeah, I'm really into white wine. I'd probably say more than, I don't know how to say more, but I drink more white on a day-to-day basis. I will say that.
That's where I'm at too. I drink more whites, and if you asked me 5 years ago, I'd never thought I'd been in that place, but absolutely love white wines. I do want to jump into, I'm going to say this right. Tell me if you're impressed. Burgundy.
Yeah.
Right? Not Burgundy, Burgundy. And I want to start off by talking about a dish you had that I'm going to make this weekend for dinner I'm doing with some friends and some wine. You had in that episode a Chardonnay creamy soup with a poached egg in it. And I
Oh,
want you
man.
to talk to me about that dish because it looks so good. I don't know if I'm going to make it right this Saturday, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you how to make it. I wish I could give you some instructions. So backing up, so we did do an episode in Burgundy or Bourgogne, and I personally, as a human, I don't care how people say it. So Burgundy is the translation of the word Bourgogne, the French word for the region. It's the reason I wanted to bring that up in the episode was it's confusing because a lot of times if you go to a French restaurant or even a not French restaurant, it might say Burgundy or it might say Bourgogne on the list. If you pick up the bottle, 99% of the time it's going to say Bourgogne. So in a show that's meant to educate people, I just wanted people to understand that it's the same thing because I think everybody knows the word Burgundy. Everybody understands that is that place. But I think Bourgogne, sometimes when people see it, they just don't know what that means. It's the same thing. So that was why I wanted to make sure I addressed that. I figured there's enough people out there who call it Burgundy. So like between me and between all the other people, we'll get the message across that it's one and the same. So
Absolutely.
So anyway, you have permission to call it Burgundy, Bourgogne, however you want. The dish was really fun. So one of the things I learned when I was in the region was the region is very homey and comfortable. You know, if you put somebody wrote it perfectly to me in a DM they sent me. They were like, you know, I associate Bourgogne as like the Piedmont equivalent.
Okay.
And I associate Tuscany with the Bordeaux equivalent. Like Tuscany and Bordeaux have these kind of bigger estates. They're set up for the tasting rooms. They feel like things are kind of geared towards a wine industry. And Piedmont was similar to what I found in Bourgogne, which is like you go there and it just feels very authentic and real. It's small producers. Even the ones who are very famous are very small. Half of them don't even have tasting rooms. They like come taste in their garage. Or it's a very small tasting room. They don't have hotels and resorts attached. They don't have restaurants attached. I'm sure there's some exceptions, but it just feels like a homey region. So when I back to that restaurant encapsulated in the episode like everything I had seen about the region. I was like, oh, there's a fireplace. It's this old brick building with wood. The food was homey. It wasn't anything particularly fancy, but it was really tremendous food with great ingredients. And he made this dish and we had it with Chardonnay. It was an egg that was poached in a Chardonnay cream sauce with mushrooms. And then they had the toasted like baguette slice with it and you just dipped it. And it was almost like a soup/stew, but it was white with mushrooms and Chardonnay and a little like citrus. It was so amazing. I never had anything like that. So it was one of the best dishes I've had on the show in quite some time.
I want to stay. Well, let me ask you this. Is this your first time going to Burgundy?
Yeah. Crazy, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that. But let me just kind of put you on the spot. Did you have an expectation of the region? And you kind of answered it with it being, but did you think it was going to be a little bit more, you know, when you hear about some of the most expensive wines in the world, white or red, come from this area. Did you think it was going to be a little more pretentious and a little bit more hoity-toity? Yes. And getting there, absolutely. You found it is just, you know, down to earth. I mean, I think about the scene you had in the garage with these young winemakers. I mean, it's just fantastic. So did it kind of surprise you a little bit is what I'm asking.
Oh, yeah. I totally had expectations going in. I try not to, especially for certain episodes. We can talk about some upcoming ones. But I try not to have expectations because it just makes for a more genuine experience. But I couldn't help it because I had studied Bourgogne. You know, you study it so much as you're going through your exams and you've tried these wines for years and you have a vision of what you think these places look like. So I couldn't not. And I definitely thought it would be much more grandiose than it ended up being, but in a good way. Like I liked that about the region. It is nice sometimes to go to a region that has more infrastructure and caters more towards visitors, right? Like there is something to be said for that, for sure. But if you're looking for an authentic it's the winos wine region, right? Like that is it. I mean, it feels like that. And Piedmont felt similar, if I'm being honest. Piedmont felt very similar.
Cool. I want to ask you, I always say to people who are trying to explore more in wine, I always say, one, if you like Cabernet or you like Syrah, or find other regions around the world that make these wines, and, go in with an open mind. Don't have an expectation, this bar of, okay, here's why I like it here. So that's the standard. Go in with an open mind and see what they can do in that region. And obviously, when you go to Burgundy, people think Pinot Noir and they think Chardonnay. But then I'll tell them, once you get there, explore, and you're going to find some other wines made from other grapes you didn't even know were in that region, and you're going to have a great time on that journey as well. So obviously we know Pinot Noir and we know Chardonnay. Were there some other grapes, some other wines that you discovered or maybe knew about but didn't drink a whole lot of that you went, okay, I need to start exploring these a little bit more? These are really good.
So I actually will push back with you a little bit on that. There's almost nothing else.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They by law, just because that's how the law is set up in a lot of these European regions. Now, some of them are more flexible than others. Like we'll talk about Loire. They can do a bunch. Rhone can do a bunch. They can only do 2 grapes. There are exceptions. So there's an appellation. I won't hit them all right now, but there's a small appellation in the very north that can do some Sauvignon Blanc. There is Gamay allowed in certain areas and that are outside of Beaujolais. I mean,
the one grape I was thinking of that I've actually really enjoyed was Aligoté.
Yeah. So that's made in Bouzeron in a couple areas, but they don't even make it like in the Côte d'Or, in Chablis, in really Macon. They only make it in Chalonnais in this one kind of obscure appellation. So like, besides that, though, that's it. Like those are the 4. Like you see almost nothing else. You see 95% Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. You see Gamay in a few select areas. You see Aligoté in a few select areas. But what's wild, going back to the wines are different, though, because I will lean into that, like why that region continues to perplex people who are even the most astute wine drinkers is because the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay can vary so much. Like take Pinot Noir, it can vary from this super lean 12.5%, 13% wine with no tannin to a pretty brooding medium plus body, medium tannin, dark fruit, earthy wine. I mean, it really runs a pretty big spectrum of what it can do. That's what makes the area so fun.
Yeah, and I do want to say, I think for, Americans who get into wine, we start in Napa. And the label in Napa is pretty easy, right? It tells you where you are, Napa Valley. It tells you whether you're in Rutherford or Calistoga. And it tells you if it's the dominant grape, what the wine is, the grape is in that bottle. I remember getting into Old World, Italy and France, and trying to explore. I mean, you have to learn that region is what you have to know, and that'll tell you, to your point that you were kind of making, there's only a few wines or a few grapes that you can use to make wine in those regions. So that's tough to kind of learn when you're first getting into it.
I mean, that's why I made the show, because that's exactly it. Bourgogne in particular is one of those regions that comes across as more complicated than it is, because people want to get into, the Premier Cru, the Grand Cru, the village level, the regional level. You have all these different appellations, that's meticulously mapped out, even down to the vineyard. But all you really need to know if you're getting into wine is that it's Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. If it's red, it's Pinot Noir. If it's white, it's Chardonnay. That's it. And they're leaner styles than you're probably used to from a California winery. Past that, that's like a gateway to start exploring. And then you can go as deep as you want, but it really doesn't have to be complicated. And I tell people when they look at a list at a restaurant, you don't have to necessarily get the top expression to get a good representation of a place. In fact, I would say, unless you're familiar with a place, there's not much reason for you to venture into the Premier Cru and Grand Crus of Bourgogne, for instance, which are pricey. if you don't have a solid foundation of what the grape is in the first place. You want to start with that foundation. It's kind of like the single malt versus blended Scotch thing. You can start with blended Scotch and you can use that as your gateway drug to explore more of the single malts. And you can do that with the kind of the regional entry level wines and then start getting more into the more expensive, more prestigious areas.
So you bring up a good point, because I think when people first hear Burgundy, they first think expensive. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Obviously, there are some very expensive wines that come from there, but I think you can still find some really good value for some really great wines. And what come to mind to me are the Macon and the Chardonnays are a couple of regions. And I even think in Chablis, you can still find some really good values for some great wines.
Yeah, and value is all relative. So listen, it's not the cheapest region. There's no question. I can't say in good conscience that Burgundy can compete with, some places in South America or Portugal on your kind of price spectrum for quality. There's a bit of a barrier to entry. If you have to hit a certain amount, because it's just the way it is. It's a small region. They're very, very sought after. That being said, you don't have to spend $100. As long as you hit that $25, $30, you get great regional entry-level wines in those areas you spoke about for, and the other thing too is that, again, some of the more expensive wines are more expensive because they were in better vintages and thus they can lay down longer. But if you're not going to lay the wine down, you don't need to spend the extra money on the wine with the more developed tannin structure and the one that can go for 5 years. You're going to pop it tonight. You don't necessarily have to go for that one. So I would say in that 30 to 50 range, especially in those regions you recommended, Chardonnay, Maconnais, Chablis, there's great values. And the other thing is that there really is nothing like Bourgogne, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay. There's not a comparison. I can't tell you can get the same thing for less money, because those wines are just so distinct from other places in the world. I might tell you can have a good time messing around with, I don't know, Cabernets from different regions or something like that. But these wines are just, Bourgogne is Bourgogne. I feel the same way about Sangiovese from Italy. I've had Sangiovese from other places. Just doesn't taste like Italy in a glass the way Sangiovese does.
100% agree. Staying in this region and talking about the grapes, we mentioned those, but I want to talk about a style of wine that me and my wife really enjoy from Bourgogne, which is the Cremant. I mean, I think about if you like bubbles, and who doesn't like bubbles, and, champagne, it's great. It can get a little pricey. An alternative to me is Cremants from around France, specifically Bourgogne, because they make some great ones at a very affordable price.
Yeah, and it's the same grapes. I mean, that's what's really crazy. And it's similar terroir, and it's similar northernly longitude level.
Yeah.
So that's what's wild, is that you're getting the same grapes, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. The only other one they do in Champagne is Pinot Meunier sometimes, but the primary grapes are the same. You're getting a very similar level of, the climate is similar. It's very chilly. You're getting this great high acid wine. And then, you're getting the traditional Champagne method, which is the most important part about all of it. A lot of people say, the joke is it's not Champagne unless it's from Champagne, France. And there's been all those memes and riffs on that expression, right? But it's actually more important to me is not the fact that it's from Champagne, France. It's that they use the Champagne method or the traditional method. Well, the Cremant also does. And that's Cremant, whether it's from Burgundy, so Cremant de Bourgogne, or that's Cremant from Alsace, from Loire. They all have to use that traditional method, which is the long lees aging. Lees are the dead yeast cells. Sits on those, gets those brioche, those toast characteristics. So that is the number one way you can get an approximation of Champagne without paying Champagne prices, because Champagne prices are crazy these days. I mean, they start at $50 to $60. It's wild.
Yeah, and to your point, that's the tell on the label. If you see Cremant, you're getting that traditional method as far as the process of making those bubbles.
Exactly. Or if it says some other places, France will almost always say Cremant, but other regions in the world will usually say method traditional method, metodo classico. So they'll have other ways of saying the same thing, but that's what you want to look for if you like that toasty, bready complexity that champagne brings. Those are the words on the label to look for.
And who doesn't like that?
Well, sometimes I will say, sometimes I don't mind a nice, like fruity, like Prosecco Charmat method wine. So it doesn't discourage me from buying those wines.
Sure.
But yeah, there is something special about that process for sure. And also to me, you get this really great bubble character that's very, very fine. And you don't get that with other methods.
I want to ask you, you obviously love food, you love wine, that they go together and you love them together. Do you cook at home? Are you a home chef? Yeah. Are you? Okay.
Yeah. My parents, I didn't mention this too, but my parents owned a restaurant when I was a kid. It was a breakfast lunch place in downtown Cleveland, but I grew up learning how to cook. I didn't realize how much I knew how to cook till I went to college, and I was like, you guys don't know how to like make a simple like red sauce or like a simple salad. Like, everybody else was clueless, and I had absorbed all this knowledge from my parents over the years from cooking with them. And so, I cook almost every night, especially when I have time. Like I don't hesitate to take a Sunday and do a full day cooking project. That to me is like such a relaxing Sunday. It's the best. I love to have people over. I love to do kind of dinner parties with friends. So I definitely do.
That's awesome, because I'm very similar. My wife will always say, what are you cooking tonight? And what are you going to pour in my glass? So you can just relax. I do want to mention that I asked that question because a couple of years ago, you did kind of a cooking episode where you paired a wine with it, but you made a specific dish. And I've made it probably 6 or 7 times for friends over the last couple of years. And it's a huge hit. It's your grilled peach with prosciutto and the burrata and the toasted pine nuts. I mean, that salad is absolutely amazing.
No, thank you. It actually breaks my heart that series didn't work out the way I wanted. It's not that I liked how it came out, and obviously you did too, so I appreciate that. I found that the food space on YouTube is too crowded. Yep. I cannot compete. I cannot be found. And for the amount of effort we put into those shoots, I couldn't justify the time effort that it took to film that and get it out. So I wanted to keep that series going. What it was most people, they pick the food and then they say, okay, what's the wine? I flipped it on its head. So the concept was, I'm starting with the wine and now I'm going to pick a dish that goes exactly with this wine. So that was the concept of the show. I still think it's a good concept if it ever got picked up by a network, but I don't think I can make it work on YouTube unless I don't know, have a bigger budget where I can have, somebody kind of help me crank them out, and we can put out maybe 20 of them and they can start to be found.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that didn't work out either, because I took a couple of your recipes and really, really enjoyed those. I mean, tremendously. And by the way, all my friends did as well. But talking about, you mentioned there the production and everything that you have to do in getting these shoots done. People are going to go and check out your show on YouTube and go, man, this is shot at a very high level, and the production value is so good. They're going to assume that you have a production company. And I just want people, I'll let you speak to it, but this is a small kind of shop you guys are running and putting this together with a small group of people.
Yeah, very small. People think we're backed by big money, and we are not. We do have sponsors that help us get the episodes done, but it's not like we're backed by a big network, a Hulu, an Amazon, a Food Network, anything like that. But I do feel like the quality of what we put out is on par with what they might do at one of those networks with the show. The team is, it's changed over the years, how many we've gone up and down. The main core group is me and my wife. So my wife works full time with me on the show. She works as producer. She also helps me with the editing, but she also does a little bit of everything. It's the classic saying, behind every great man, there's a greater woman. I mean, she's been around since the beginning, even when she had a full-time job doing something else. She's been, dedicating her time to this. She reads the scripts before anybody does. She, sees all the drafts. So there's me and my wife. And then she comes on the shoots, works as producer in one of the cameras. And then usually it's 2 camera people and maybe a third PA or a on-set producer. So there's usually about 5 of us on set. And the process, it takes a long time. I think people think we just show up and turn on the cameras. We're planning an episode. It's usually about a year from beginning to talk to a region to go film to episode is out on YouTube. I'd say we spend about 4 or 5 months getting all the funding together, figuring out the concepts, the episode themes, writing the script, planning the logistics. We've got about a week of filming, usually 6 days of filming at this point, which is funny because when we started, I think we filmed the first episode in a day and a half.
Wow.
Yeah, so the shoots have really evolved in a good way. We can tell a lot more story, but there's also a lot more. I keep spending all the money we bring in to make the episodes. Like you'd be like, oh, like now we can make more money, and then I can, and we're doing, well enough. I'm not complaining, but I always end up just putting all the money I bring in back in the episode because I want to make them bigger and better, right? I bring more people on, or I do more segments. So now the shoots are 6 days. And then the real magic is the editing. I learned very early on that the editing was where I needed to put my time and I couldn't outsource it. One day, maybe I might outsource with like some assistant editors, but it's so much of the product. And it has to be what is in my head, especially because I don't think anybody has the wine knowledge. What editor would have the wine knowledge so they know what to keep in and what to cut? The hardest part of my job is taking an hour-long interview with a winemaker and cutting it down to 6 minutes. And, me and my wife can do that in a way that I think other editors just couldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I do also want to get us to the next region, which was episode 2 in this season's season, Loire Valley. Going there. First time there as well?
First time there as well. I think I was there in college in the city of Tours, but I didn't go to the wine region.
Here's a question for you. When I think about France and I think about when you go to visit, obviously people go, man, if I'm going to visit a wine region in France, I'm going to go to Bordeaux. I'm going to go to Champagne. I'm going to go to Burgundy. I may even go down to the Rhone Valley or Provence. Loire doesn't seem to be a region that comes up a lot. Maybe it's just because of the people I know and the people, how they travel. But do you see the same thing? And do you agree with me that it's a region they might be missing out on?
Oh, 100%. I mean, from a wine perspective, it's one of my favorite regions of all time, if not the favorite region. I think the reason it doesn't get visited as much for winos, I think it's actually pretty popular for visiting because of all the castles.
Yeah.
But I think winos kind of overlook it when they go, if you're not a bit of a wine nerd who really appreciates and likes the Loire Valley. Going back to that conversation we had about white wines, it's primarily white wines there. They do make Cabernet Franc and they do make some Gamay and some other grapes, but it's a primarily white wine growing region. Though unlike Bourgogne, they do a bunch of different grapes and styles. And even the reds are lean, right? So if you like rich, powerful wines, that's why a lot of people will end up going to Tuscany. They'll go to Bordeaux. They like kind of richer styles. The red wines there are a leaner style of wine. So I think from a wine perspective, unless you're a bit of a wine geek, it's not on your radar. But once you get to that point where you like those wines, they have, talk about value. We talked about how Bourgogne, there's like a barrier to entry of like a certain amount, and you can spend the most expensive wines on the planet come from there. You could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars if you want on the bottles. You don't have to do that in Loire. It's the best part about it. You can get what I call the blue chip examples. You can get the best of the best producers and their best top cuvee for like $100. And that's crazy. And then there's all sorts of wines that start at like $15, $20 that are just blow your socks off awesome at a killer price and are really fun wines. They have character. They're not ubiquitous at all. They have a lot of distinct character. So I love that region for that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Absolutely, it's a white wine region. And I think the one that, again, draws people there would probably be, tell me if you disagree, Sancerre. The Sauvignon Blanc is what gets you there.
Yeah. Yeah. And ironically, we saved that for a second episode, because in our episode, we just looked at it and we were like, one, like Sancerre people already know that. And I want to introduce them to the rest of Loire. And two, there's enough to talk about there and in some of the other areas of Loire, like basically the far eastern areas, that I'll do that in another episode. So you're 100% correct. If they know Loire, they know Sancerre. But to me, the fun and the magic is in the Muscadet, in the Chenin Blanc, and in the Cabernet Franc, which is what we cover in the episode.
Well, and that's what I wanted to kind of get to, because I went to that region finding, through Sancerre, and found Chenin Blanc. And it might be one of my top 3 favorite white wines to drink from the Loire Valley, but also some great wines from Chenin Blanc in South Africa as well that I really enjoy. But I also found a grape, the Muscadet, which is, the grape is actually, how do you say the grape, the Bourgogne?
They're just calling him, so it's Melon de Bourgogne because it came from Burgundy, but now they're changing it to just Melon Blanc or Melon. They're trying to kind of disassociate from Burgundy, I think, to make it their own thing so people don't get confused that it's a Burgundy grape.
So talk about those 2 wines and what you liked about those, if nobody's ever had a Chenin Blanc or a Muscadet. Because when I found these, I still have some in the fridge. I went and bought a bunch of these because they were so good.
Yeah, they're both just such tremendous wines. So Chenin I knew about. Muscadet I didn't know quite as much about till I got there and explored a little more. So Muscadet, let's start there. That's near the coast. That's near the Atlantic coast. So you get this great ocean salinity and minerality in the wines and in the soils. There's granite soils, so you really get this great minerality in the wines. But you also get this ripeness of fruit. And they also traditionally, going back to like wine is a little bit about everything, part of their tradition is to age in concrete and age on the lees, the dead yeast cells, for a very long time. And what that does is gives this kind of nutty, creamy texture to the wine. So even though it's a lean wine from a cool climate, well, now you pair it with the extended lees aging, and all of a sudden it starts to get creamier. In some of the nicer, they have a cru system now, about 10 appellations that are crus, that are nicer vineyards. They get more ripe, and in those riper expressions, the grapes can start to get into stone fruit and even the tropical land. The best way I can describe it is it's like top cuvee Chablis, but at a 50% of the price. It's wild and Chablis is already, I think, a relative value compared to the rest of Bourgogne. But then you go to Muscadet and you can get Chablis-esque wines for a reasonable price. I didn't know how much Muscadet absorbs terroir until I started talking to him. And he's like, yeah, because it's from Burgundy. It's from Bourgogne, the grape. And if there's a region in the planet that is known for the grapes sucking up terroir, it's Bourgogne. We took this grape from Bourgogne. We planted it here. It's known for doing that. So all that to say, these are tremendous values and like values in France are starting to become like sparse. Like a lot of the stuff now is more and more expensive, but this is one of them. So that's why I love that grape.
So when you were in Loire Valley, we always talk about wine and food. Was there a particular dish that you had that you just absolutely enjoyed while there? A food that you hadn't heard of or been exposed to before? And I know there's a lot of those.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a food I hadn't been exposed to. What did I do at the end of the episode I'm struggling with, what restaurants we went to. Oh, we did. No, it was just, what it was? It was kind of similar to what I liked about the other restaurant I talked about from Bourgogne episode. Everything was just kind of homey. And I had a winemaker tell me Loire is for the people. It's the region for the kings because there's a bunch of chateaux there, pretty castles. It's a gorgeous wine region to visit, but the wine is for the people. And I felt like the food is for the people. And so we went to a little bistro called Moulin Bleu, and it was just homey food, very similar to Burgundy food. They do a lot of seafood. I went to a kind of upscale restaurant at the end of the episode that they're getting all the fish from the Loire River and doing a really amazing kind of high-end dishes with it. There was the giant seafood tower at the beginning of the episode, which had all sorts of, raw seafood, but French raw seafood. So when I think of a seafood tower at a steakhouse in America, I kind of expect the same couple things. This had that. This had the oysters, but it also had the had the prawns, it had the cockles, it had the little sea snails, it had all the things that I like about raw French seafood. So that was probably my favorite food item from Loire.
When you think about the Loire Valley, I think if you think red wine, you mentioned it, Cab Franc is kind of what took me there as far as a red wine. I did find out that there is some Pinot Noir made there that I really enjoy, Sancerre Rouge. When people hear Cab Franc, they think of it as that Bordeaux grape. It's kind of that helping hand to the right bank a lot of times and stuff like that. How did you find? Did you enjoy the Cab Francs from there? Do you drink a lot of Cab Franc from Loire Valley before going there?
Yes and yes. So okay. I'll answer this, and I have to quickly talk about Chenin too because I skipped your Chenin question.
Yeah.
But the Cab Franc, I mean, if you're not familiar with it, like you said, people maybe know it as the grape that's part of Bordeaux blends, so you don't really understand it very much. It's usually used in a small percentage to give kind of floral notes and lifts, acidity, freshness to the blend. You might have had single varietal expressions of it from like a California winery, but it's almost always done in warm climates. This is a cool climate red wine that has a spectrum of flavors, but it is a savory wine, and that's why I love it. It's more leans into floral, into earthy, into sometimes some vegetal or some herbal characteristics, kind of charred red fruit. Like it has this great savory component, granite, cinnamon. I don't talk about fruit right away when I talk about it, and it's still very, very fresh, which I really like because, again, from a pairing perspective, these wines are really, really versatile with pairing because they tend to have low to medium tannin and great acidity. There are expressions of it that can age for very long periods of time as well, some of the more tannic expressions. So you can kind of find whatever you want within the grape, very similar to Pinot Noir, honestly. And that surprised me. I had always seen it as this light, fresh, fun wine for $20 to $25, and that exists. But if you go like to 35, 40, 50, you can get amazing expressions of these wines.
Yeah. And going back to Chenin Blanc, you're going to finish up.
Yeah, Chenin. I mean, Chenin's I would say maybe my favorite grape. I mean, it's hard to argue with Chardonnay when it's done right, but it's the red wine lover's white wine. It's, again, just leans in savory land. I mean, there's nobody who, if you're a red wine lover and you're kind of trying to venture into this land of white wines, and maybe you had something like a Sancerre or Sauvignon Blanc, and you're like, oh, this is tart and acidic, and it's lime and citrus, and it's kind of the opposite. Well, that's not Chenin Blanc. Chenin Blanc is this ripe stone fruit, bruised apple, waxy, honey, lanolin, wool wine that does every single style. It does sparkling, it does dry, it does off dry, it does sweet, it does aged really well, it ages tremendously. It's just a tremendous wine, and especially from Loire. I do like a lot of the versions from South America, but I think it is very distinct to Loire, being its homeland, that it has a unique character from there.
I do want to kind of finish up, and I appreciate the time you've given us today, with asking you mentioned Sancerre, and you said it's so big, it deserves its own episode. So that's kind of a tease to me, Vince. I mean, when's that episode coming? Is this season, or is this something where you're going to require another trip back to Loire?
Yeah, we didn't film it, so we'll have to go back. I actually think we've done a pretty good job covering France, which is fine because, I mean, listen, I always say the French are the Beatles of the wine world. You can argue if they're the best, but they were definitely the first with a lot of things, right? Yeah. A lot of the places in the world emulate what the French did. And so we've hit up every major French wine region with the exception of Northern Rhone, Champagne, and Alsace. Every other major French wine region, and then probably that area of Loire. But we can do Jura and maybe Savoie and some other places. But to me, the major ones have all been covered, which I'm proud of. So I don't know when I'll get back to France, only because if the opportunity presents itself, I'll probably take it. But I just have so many other places in the wine world that I want to go and explore and tell the stories. People are even trying to get me to come back and do second episodes in places. And I'm like, I just have too many other places I want to go, you know?
So what's on the schedule? I mean, can we get a sneak peek of what might be around the corner?
Yeah, the only one I'm comfortable announcing, which you're kind of getting a scoop. I don't think I've announced this on a podcast yet. We're going to Georgia, the country of Georgia.
That'll be interesting. And a lot of people who are listening and may not know, wine's been being made. That a lot of people will call that the home of wine.
That is the oldest wine growing country in the world. You could argue if it was in Armenia close by, or if it was Georgia. There is some debate, but I think the general consensus is it is the oldest wine country in the world, about 8,000 years. And they do very, very different and distinct wines, which is why I'm excited. I'm also excited because some episodes I go in, I know a lot, right? I know a lot about the French wine regions or the California wine regions. I'm going to have to do my homework before we go. I don't know a ton about Georgian wine. I know a little bit about the grapes and the orange wine, which they're so famous for. They call it amber wine, but they make a lot more than that. They make red wine and white wine. And I am excited to understand the culture. I've looked a bit at like the food because any vacation, whether it's if it's this or if it's vacation, like I base it around food and wine. So I looked at the food. I'm like, this food looks really cool. It looks like this combination of Eastern European and Middle Eastern. And I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I don't know what to expect with like the people. I don't know if I've met many Georgian people. So I have this excitement. I love France. I talk Loire episodes, kind of like a love letter to my time in France. I lived in France for 6 months in college. I really do love that country. But I am excited to go somewhere I haven't been and be surprised again.
Yeah, that's going to be fun for us to kind of see this really genuine and authentic kind of reaction to this region, the foods, the wines, and this is going to be fun for us to watch. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, there's two types of episodes. There's the ones where I know what I'm talking about before I go in, and I can, I'm not too surprised by styles or things like that. And then there's an episode like this where I have no idea what to expect, and it'll be a lot of fun for the viewer to come along with us for the ride.
Now, I do want to ask you, I'm down in the Texas area in Houston. Texas wine region's growing. I got to ask, is there maybe not on the, in the near future, but somewhere on the radar, is there a trip that might be considered? I won't say planned, but might be considered for coming to the Texas wine region?
I've had conversations with people in Texas to make it happen. I just haven't been able to put it together quite yet, and the timing hasn't worked out. I definitely will get down there. I mean, my next domestic U.S. episodes will likely, if it were up to me, be Texas, Idaho, and Michigan, I would say. Those three are the highest on my list to go see.
I get Michigan and I get Texas. I didn't even think about Idaho. That'll be fun to watch when that comes out.
Yeah, the Snake River Valley is really coming up. You've got, you're very close to Oregon, where you've got a lot of, similar terroir. I think it's going to be an area to keep an eye out for. Like if I was investing, I would potentially, if I was going to go buy a winery, might be an area where I'd consider it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, while we close out this episode, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about, we've mentioned the YouTube channel and the great content and the education people can get there in a very fun way. But I want you to mention a little bit, you have a website that also offers a whole lot more. Can you talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah. So part of our ethos, I mentioned the education thing. So the shows are always free. I'm keeping them free on YouTube forever. I will not, ever put them behind a paywall. That was a big thing when I started because I wanted the knowledge to be accessible to, any sort of economic background you're coming in when you're trying to get into wine. But we do have a Vino VIP club. And if you want, this is how we keep going. Like we do get some sponsorship, but the way we keep going is our VIP members. It's $5, $10, or $20 a month. Different tiers get different things. You get most of the benefits with the $5 tier, if I'm honest. And you get early access to our shows a couple weeks before the general public. You get ad-free access. You get a weekly email, and we do all sorts of raffles, giveaways, private events. We're doing a big event in Arizona in about 3 weeks. We're calling it Vino Spring Training, and anybody can come. It's open to the public. We're doing a dinner one night and a ball game the next day. but you get a discount if you're a Vino VIP member. We oftentimes will put together wine packs that we can ship for the episodes, and you get a discount on those if you're a Vino VIP member. So we really try and make it a lot of features for just, like I said, 5, 10, or 20 a month. Most importantly, though, it just helps us keep going and support us and continue to make content and keep it free.
And that's just viasforvino.com.
Yeah, you'll see it. You'll see the sign right up top. It says join VIP.
Okay.
Right there.
And social media, you do some Instagram, things like that?
Yeah. So YouTube is where the show is, but if you want to keep in touch on like a day-to-day, Instagram is where we'll kind of put updates, and it's still at V is for Vino, VISFORVINO. We are on Facebook and TikTok, but we're probably less active on those, I would say. Instagram and YouTube are the two big ones.
Well, Vince, man, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I can't thank you enough for coming on and doing this with us. Really had a great time and getting to pull the veil back a little bit and kind of get behind the scenes of what goes on with V is for Vino.
No, I appreciate it. Listen, I'm flattered you're interested and your audience is interested, because it's fun to see how it's grown, and it's fun to, now that we have a base of knowledge, to give it out in the world for free, and hopefully we can help people on their wine journeys. Yeah.
Well, I'm the average guy. I'm not in the profession. I just love to enjoy wine, explore the world of wine and food. And so, a show like yours kind of helps that journey go along in a way that I learn a lot. So we really appreciate it.
Glad we could help.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of Bottles and Bites Without Borders. And until we see you on the next one, enjoy that next pour.